Thinking Like a Lawyer, Episode 3, or as I like to call it, TLA. So, in our last episode, we talked about Elon Musk and the acquisition or the pathway towards the acquisition of Twitter, which is still an interesting case, and we'll continue to give information about that as time goes on. The first one we did was about non competition agreements. As you know, I generally don't like non competition agreements or any post employment restrictive covenant. But today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different about compensation and what compensation really means for people that are looking for a new job. Oftentimes, people look for a position and they'll see a job description that looks really interesting to them, but they'll be surprised because there's no pay range, no compensation range. I thought about this because a good friend of mine and a business leader, Charlie Safro, made a post not too long ago asking about this. And she's a specialist, subject matter expert in recruiting and retention. And when you think about this, it's a problem that a lot of people encounter. How much does the role pay? When you're an applicant, you care about really two things. What is the job? And two, how much money will I be paid to do the thing you're asking me to do? Well, I want you to think like a lawyer. Let's explain why some jobs don't contain the wages and the compensation range, and why it might be a good idea for you as a business owner to really consider why you choose to include it or to not include it. So, number one, why do people not include compensation ranges? Well, as a lawyer, I'll talk about some of the legal reasons you may not want to. Again, this is not intended for legal advice. Nothing I say here is meant for legal advice. I'm not your attorney. You know this. We've talked about it. But I do want to help you think like a lawyer. So, one of the biggest challenges when you put a role out there for someone to come and do is that when you do that, you have a challenge of who's going to apply for the role. So if the role pays 50,000, you're going to get people that are making 20,000 just because they want the opportunity to make more money. I had this all the time when I hired mechanics all across the country. I would put the compensation range, the hourly ranges for my mechanics, and I would have people that have no skill in the business of repairing maintenance or vehicles apply for the role. I'd have line cooks and others. So the reality is, at the end of the day, that sometimes you just want to have less applicants. That's important because you want to really make sure that your team isn't wasting their time with people that aren't qualified for a given role. And that's something that I really care about. Oh, I got something from Kalytics. Let's see. Talk about why there's a way to broadcast news industry. I have some tea I could spill in that one. Ooh, I love comments. I want to do more things that you guys all find interesting. This right now is streaming to a few different places. It's got LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. I do think about doing it streaming on Twitter. I just don't know. I don't know Twitter well enough, but we'll get to that in a moment. So, you have the job description. You don't want too many applicants. Let's talk about what really happens. Employers don't like you talking about how much you make, and they don't want you talking with your colleagues about how much you make. Many times when companies are hiring people, they're willing to pay more for the new hire than they're willing to pay for what's actually their teammates. That's what really happens. In some circumstances, the range that's available for the new hire is more than what people in the same role are doing. That is a problem. And I'm going to use an actual example of an actual case that I actually did as an attorney. In the before time, before I got into supply chain and things that I do today, I was and I remain an attorney. I was a labor and employment attorney, and I had a client, and this client had a problem. The case is now King v. Acosta, and that King v. Acosta case was decided in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. I won, by the way. But it's important to note what really happens. So when people are looking for a job and how much you're willing to pay them, a lot of times what employers will do is they'll look at what your past job was. So your compensation range really depends on what you made at your last role. That sounds kind of unfair. It is. And so what ends up happening in these cases when someone is trying to say, well, what is my compensation supposed to be? The hiring manager will say, well, what did you make at your last role? This is why in very large institutional companies, people can't just jump from one pay bracket to another one really easily. It's really kind of difficult to do that. And so when we're asking, think like a lawyer, what do you want to avoid? Well, you don't want to get sued, number one. That's the worst thing in the world. You want to make sure your people are happy. And what many employers think makes employees happy is just not knowing anything. So we have all this stuff around what we do. Not talking about compensation is really important. That's one of the things most businesses prefer their employees not to do. I'll tell you, successful companies are very candid with what compensation ranges look like. Big companies have very specific lines of demarcation as to what each role pays. I do think that if you are trying to hire people and you're trying to retain them, being candid is the most important thing. Explaining to a candidate early on about what the compensation package looks like and if there's any post employment restrictive covenants is really important. And so, what I want people to understand is when businesses choose not to post the compensation ranges, there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons may be you're underpaying your existing staff. Another reason is you're giving your HR and your hiring team the ability to negotiate down what you're willing to pay because the last role that you had paid less. So let's talk about King v. Acosta. Let's do that for a moment. It's a 2012 case. You can find it somewhere. It's nothing crazy. The story goes that a woman was being paid effectively half of what her male counterparts were being paid. And the justification for this, the rational business justification given by the employer was, look, she wasn't making that much before she came to us. We were paying people based on their market value, and someone else has been at a higher role and they were paid more. And that was their rationale for not paying a colleague at the same level as her compares, her peers. Now, she outsold them. She was a salesperson. And they would use this idea of past compensation to justify paying people under what they're supposed to be paid. This is all at will stuff, right? I mean, this is the thing that frustrates people. Every single one of you who's watching this right now have looked at applying for a job and you said, well, I understand what you want me to do, but I don't understand what you're going to give me to do it. Then you have to have a conversation. And then companies do these little tricky things where they say, are you really just here for the money? Aren't you here for the culture? We treat each other like a family. Last I checked, culture doesn't put food on the table. It may, I don't know. I'm not a culture kind of guy. I'm really interested in companies candidly telling their prospective employees what working like them is with them is going to be like. And that's giving clear communication as to what you're going to get paid. Every company should be focused on doing this, providing the best opportunity for a candidate to make a decision. I can tell a lot about a company based on what they say in the job description. And this is what I want everyone to do. When you're thinking about why these decisions are made, why don't you get to have the compensation range put on your job description? I think that's probably lazy on the part of the employer to not give you that information. So, again, we'll just do a brief recap. Most companies that are out there will put the compensation ranges on the job description. It's important to get candidates that know what they're doing. But if you end up getting a job description that doesn't have the compensation range, first thing anyone should ask is, what is the pay rate? What is the compensation range? Employers understand that's the first question the candidate's going to ask you. If you don't post it, that is the absolute first question. Second question should be followed up with, are there any post-employment restrictive covenants I should be aware of? That might be for a later time. But at the end of the day, when you have these things, they are designed to do specific things. Keep employees and teammates in the dark about what everyone else is making. So if you hire somebody and your people that are doing this job already are being paid less, they're not going to know that the new person coming in is making more. In this industry, in every industry, people make increases of their salary and compensation by changing jobs. You're not getting these big bonuses or big sign-ons for retention. You are getting them for making specific moves towards a new role. What I want people to understand is that, oh, and that's a great point from Barry, is we thought maybe the competition shouldn't know. Oh my goodness. Kate mentioned here in the comments, look at Wrenchway. What Wrenchway allows people to do is mechanics, for example, to talk about their compensation among different companies. If you think as an employer that your colleagues and your employees don't understand the competitive market for pricing, oh my gosh, they do. They absolutely do. And when they do understand this, it's important for people to look at ways to make a good living, and that's okay. So when companies are out there trying to recruit, it's a commodity. Labor is a commodity, folks. If you're a mechanic or a driver, there's a general range of these things are available. And if you're in any other industry, these are ranges. They're ranges of what you do. So if you see a company not posting the compensation rate, understand that the first thing you're going to ask about is the compensation. They may tell you that it's important. Oh, yeah, there's a great quote. Put that there. Yeah, Jennifer, it is. It's designed to manipulate you. The goal of these companies is to pay you as little as they possibly can. And again, that's not a bad thing. Companies aren't charities. We are here to make money for our shareholders, and that labor is a very big cost. So what ends up happening is, again, we talked about this a little bit before. Job posting is there. There is not a range. And you're going to ask that employer in a conversation, how much are you willing to pay for this? Because I can do the job. I just need to know what you're paying. And if they don't do it, there's a lot of reasons for that. One, you may get too many people applying. Two, you may give your competitors a competitive advantage. What are you paying currently? Well, if they're asking this, we should just pay 5%, 10% more, and we'll get more people. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for workers to realize that they have a lot more latitude and power than they think. And it's important for employers to realize if you're not going to be candid with your client or your candidate right away and say, this is the job, this is the benefits, this is the comp package. And it might range based on experience or other things. That's fine. If you're using this as a tool to suppress the wages of your existing teammates, or you're using it to negotiate clients or candidates down because their past experience has gotten them to a dollar figure that's too low and you're not going to bounce them up too high, that's wrong. And you're probably you're going to lose on that over time. It's not good for your employees. It's not good for your shareholders. It's not good for your suppliers. End of the day, I'm so excited to keep doing these little videos and thinking like a lawyer. You all are starting to think a lot more like a lawyer. That's a good thing. The whole point of this is to help educate you specifically on when a challenge is presented, how should you think about it? Because there's good arguments on almost every side of every issue. The important thing about thinking like a lawyer is understanding both sides as strongly as you can. And if you do that, you will be successful. As always, I'm so excited to be here. We're now at 12 minutes. I think I'll wrap it up. We'll do more of these in the future. Big news coming soon. If you've been watching or paying attention, you'll see some things in a little bit. Let's see what this question is. I do like salary to be posted so it's clear on interest. Like wide range also shows if a job is with candidate skill range. Absolutely. You're exactly right. The whole point for an employer to hire the right person is to say, this is what you're going to do. Can you do it? And number two, here's what we'll pay you to do it. Is that enough? Brian Weshy. Oh, hi, buddy. How are you doing? I'm a big fan of Brian. He's a good dude. Oh, no problem, Jennifer. I'm happy to answer these questions. I don't have any idea what I'm doing. I have no idea. I'm just trying it as a kind of an experiment. We'll continue to do these things as time goes on. And if there are questions that you see and you go, that's kind of weird. I want to know more about that. Let me know. The last thing I'll say, so I still will continue to talk about Kites and Project 44. This is a case about non-competition agreements. Essentially what happened in this case was some folks that were in there for 6 months, maybe a year. They quit, went to a competitor. Their former company sues them individually in Cook County, and they have to litigate the issue. It really sucks to get sued. If you've never been sued before, I haven't, but I've done it. It's a very terrifying process. It is so it's mesmerizing because when you talk about due process, it talks about service of process. So you get sued. You know what happens typically? A sheriff comes to your house or your business and gives you a piece of paper and says, you've been served. Now you're going to go to court. It's a terrifying process. So Kites, you're terrorizing your former employees. I think that's wrong. You probably will lose. One thing to keep a caveat, if you've watched the previous episode about non-competition agreements, courts don't like them, but courts will enforce them. And almost every single non-competition agreement that's out there will have what we call a savings clause. Savings clause just means that if the court says this part doesn't work, the court will remake the contract to make it work given the constraints. So if the company says this non-compete is the entire solar system, the court might say, that's a little expansive. Let's make that non-competition agreement for the state of Illinois. That's how these things work. So just because you might get the contract to be kind of knocked out or modified doesn't mean it goes away. The last thing I'll mention is about the one about Tesla. So the other day we talked about, hey, you want to buy a publicly traded multinational technology company. How do you do it? We break wrote that down. One thing that a lot of you should, thank you, Brian. One of the things you guys should do is look at the stock of Tesla right now. It's not doing so well. And the reason is, among other things, is a lot of Elon Musk's wealth, his personal wealth, is securities, the stock in Tesla. He doesn't have cash everywhere. He's got a bunch of stock that he can take and convert into cash. And that cash can then be used to do all sorts of things, like buy a publicly traded multinational technology company. And because that collateral is what is likely going to be used to get this acquisition done if the shareholders approve, it means that a lot of the stock that Elon Musk owns in Tesla might get sold. And if it gets sold, that means the stock price of Tesla goes down. Essentially, imagine that the senior leader of Tesla says, I would rather take my stock in Tesla and give it up and then buy stock in Twitter. That has an actual impact on the shareholders of Tesla. So it is a fascinating case. We got something from Marshall. I love Marshall. Did you see the truck that went around the bus during the brake failure? No, I haven't seen this. It will be something worth checking out. We're talking about, and we'll maybe get to this in a future episode, probably governors on trucks. There's an idea going out there that all trucks should be at the same speed all across the United States. A lot of positive things about that, a lot of negative things about that, good arguments on both sides. That may be what we break down next. Guys, I'm at 16 minutes. I am so happy that you joined me. The theme of today's conversation was, why are the job descriptions not having compensation ranges? There's a lot of reasons for that. One, it might just be for the business to not have as many applicants. That's pretty reasonable. Secondarily, it might be that you're willing to pay new hires more than your existing people, and you don't want to telegraph that. Another reason may be you don't want your competitors to know how much you're willing to pay for a given service. Those are all reasonable things. On the more con side, it can be used as a way to keep people's wages low as they come from one job to another job. And it may be that you're willing to pay somebody a little bit less than what they ought to ultimately get. Employers in the United States generally don't want you talking about your compensation. That's a big issue. It's pretty common. It's not, it's your right to talk about it. So don't pretend like the companies have this policy. They can say, you can't do it. They're lying. But at the end of the day, I like to look at these questions and go, well, why is it like this? And the only way you can understand why is any of this like this at all is to understand both sides and the history if you can. So as always, thank you for tuning in. I'm glad you're thinking like a lawyer, as we say, TLAL. And this episode is brought to you by my face on a mug or a hat or a t-shirt. If you want to get my face on a hat or a t-shirt or a mug, we'll throw it in the show notes of the T Public store, designed by my wife. She's spectacular. She's phenomenal. As always, thank you for tuning in. We're going to go ahead and end the broadcast. We're at 18 minutes. Thank you for following along. And we'll do more of these. They're generally sporadic, right? So I just do them when I feel like it. So it's not like it's going to be a scheduled thing, but maybe it will be. I don't know. Have a great day. And we end the